and welcome to the Cell Block. I'm your host, Iron Mike. A little bit of background about myself is I was in the federal system for 33 years. I retired in August of 2019 as a captain. I was on the Special Operations Response Team as a team operator, a team leader, and a team commander. I've been involved in 5 riots in my career. So, what I'm about to tell you is based on experience, real life experience as working as a correctional staff member. These are not ideas that I looked up in a book or came to the top of my head. These are real life experiences that I'm passing on in hopes it'll help you in your career as a correctional officer. So let's start with communications in a prison. Communication is without a doubt the number one priority that you have as a correctional officer. You're going to be communicating on a daily basis with your peers, with other departments, with inmates, and you have to get your directives across to those people in a clear and concise manner. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. So first of all, what is communication? Well, Webster's Dictionary refers to communication as an exchange of ideas either through language or signs. So that's basically what we're doing is we're exchanging not an idea but policy and procedure to others in the institution. This is stuff that's already been written up that's needs directed to these people, and you have to be able to explain it in a clear and concise manner. Now, we use communication to instruct, just like I'm doing right now. We also use it to the inmates in order for them to do things that we want them to do. So when you're communicating to an inmate, one thing is you don't want to do is ask the inmate a question. For example, if the day room floor needs to be mopped, you're not going to say to the orderly, do you want to mop the floor? Okay, because he's simply going to say, no, I don't want to mop the floor. Okay, so you have to give a nice, even tone. You don't have to use cuss words. You don't have to yell. Just make sure it's a directive. You need to clean the day room floor. If he gives you any other answer than okay or yes, I understand, tell him the consequences of not doing what you want him to do, and make sure he understands that okay, I want you to mop the day room floor, and if you don't, I'm going to have to write you up, incident report, whatever you call them in your institution, a disciplinary report. Make sure he understands that. Ask him, do you understand what I just said? Make him say yes. Okay? And then there's clarity. There's an instruction there. Make sure you give it in a tone that's a professional directive. You don't have to cuss at the inmate to get it done. Okay. Now, communication is an exchange of information or news. It can be verbal or nonverbal. Okay? It's means of sending or receiving information. It can be through telephone lines or computers. Okay? But one thing you have to be clear is your message that you want to send. Okay? If you're not sure of the information that you're communicating, how is the receiver supposed to be sure of what you want them to do or what they need to accomplish? You have to be clear on your communication and your information. So make sure that your information is accurate, is clear, and is communicated by simply saying to the person, do you understand what I just said? Okay? A lot of times you don't have to do that, but sometimes with the inmates you have to say, do you understand what I just said? Because they'll play their games and they'll say later when it's not done, why didn't it understand what you said? Okay, so just cut that right off as an excuse by asking them, do you understand what I just said? Every communication, anytime you communicate, it involves a sender, information, and a receiver. Okay? One thing I want to talk about is the information. Like I said before, it has to be clear, it has to be concise, it has to be accurate. Okay? You, as a sender, have to project that in a way that that receiver, and normally it's going to be the inmate, has a grasp of what you want done. Okay? So even if you have to repeat it so he understands and he says, yes, I understand what you want me to do. Now, I'm going to be referring back and forth to my computer because there's a lot of points that I don't want missed, and I find this as the easiest way to make sure that I don't do that. Okay? All right, let's talk about the four types of communication. There's verbal, nonverbal, visual, and written. Okay? So let's talk about verbal first. You need to use a strong, confident voice when you're giving a directive to an inmate. Okay? Um, you can't sound weak. When you talk in a weak voice, nobody's going to listen. Okay? And it's going to give the inmate the appearance that you're weak. Okay, you don't have to yell like a drill sergeant. However, there's older staff out there that are going to tell you that, oh, an inmate did what I told him to do because I yelled at him and cussed at him, and you know that's fine if that worked for that individual, but I don't recommend you doing that um, as a regular part of your communication style, because I have seen inmates in riots go after those type of individuals first. Um, and you don't want to be one of those individuals. You can do it without doing the unprofessional cursing and cussing, and you can get your point across and communicate well. Don't use filler words and don't use jargon, okay? Just because you work in your institution does not mean that others that you're talking to about your institution realize what you're saying. If you use terms that are only known to the state system or county system or federal system, they're not going to know what you mean. And you may come off as thinking, geez, you know, this guy works in corrections and he doesn't even know what I'm talking about. No, that's because they use different types of words for what you're trying to use. So be basic, be clear, and use simple terms when you're trying to communicate. Don't use filler words like um. How many times have you heard somebody speak and use uh, and then you end up counting how many times during the conversation they use the term You know, you don't want to be one of those type of communicators, and you don't have to be as long as you're conscious of it. It may take some practice, okay, but you can stop doing that if you do practice and you're aware of what you're saying. Nonverbal. Watch your emotions, especially when you're feeling physical. If somebody's directing communication to you and you're not in agreement with it, watch your emotions. Okay, don't swell up on them. Don't clench your fist. Don't raise your voice. Don't stick out your chest. Okay, um, use nonverbal communication that worked before in your career. So if something worked, keep it in your stash in your toolbox so you can use it later on when you're facing the same kind of situation. If it worked once, it can work again. So use that kind of mentality when you're communicating. In visual, consider your audience. Okay? What may be, hang on one second, what may be clear to a person's understanding may not be to somebody else in that crowd. So be careful what images you're projecting. And this usually goes along with training. You know, you may see something that you think is funny and you put it on your presentation and you pull it up and you've offended about half the class. Just be aware of what you're using as a visual stimulus. Written communication has to be clear and concise. Make sure that the understanding is out there to the individual that you're handing the memorandum to. Make sure that when you're covering certain incidents, it's who, what, where, and when, how. Be as clear in your memorandum writing as possible. A lot of times when you're involved in an incident and you write a memorandum, especially if it goes to court, you're going to have to refer to that memorandum. And if you're more detailed in that memorandum when you write it, it'll be clear 10 years from now when you go to court. Now, you're going to get some advice from older staff that are going to say, never put a lot of information in a memorandum when you're writing it because they'll trick you and all that stuff. That's garbage. That is pure garbage. Okay? Put as much information as you want in that memorandum so that you understand what happened, especially when it goes to court 10 years from now, because that's usually what the time frame is. 10 years down from the road, you're going to get subpoenaed to go to court, and they're going to ask you about your memorandum. You want to be able to go back and refer to that memorandum. So everything in that memo has to be clear and concise. Okay, verbal communication. Most common form of communication. Okay, it's efficient. It's supported by nonverbal and written communication. Okay, so when you're projecting, again, when you're projecting idea or exchange of information, make sure it's clear and concise, and that receiver on the other end, who 90% of the time will be an inmate, is aware of what you want accomplished or what you have just transmitted to him verbally as information. Again, do you understand what I just said? Developing verbal communication. Again, it may take some practice. You may be one of these people who yells when they communicate, throws their hands around when they communicate. You don't have to do all that stuff. If you throw your hands around in front of a mental health inmate, I guarantee you're in for a fight. Okay? That's one of the first things that you have to understand when working with mental health inmates is keep your hands down. Don't wave them. So it may take some practice because you may be one of these hand wavers that communicates that way. You have to have some self-understanding. Hey, I shouldn't do this around a mental health inmate. That's not the way to do it. Another bit of advice: do not raise your voice to a mental health inmate. You may be in for a fight. Okay? Nice, calm, clear discussion, no hand waving. That's how you deal with a mental health inmate. Keep your distance. Keep that 3 feet of cushion in between you and them because you never know when they're going to attack. Use active listening. Nothing's more frustrating when you're trying to talk to somebody and they're doing one of these things. They're looking away. They're on their cell phone. That's not active listening. You have to listen to the individual who's talking to you. Okay, so you understand what they're saying so you can respond properly. Okay, again, avoid filler words like yeah. Um, don't do that. Okay, for nonverbal, it's using body languages or gestures or facial expressions. Okay, just be aware. If somebody's talking to you and right away you do this, you're telling them that you just put a barrier between what they're saying and you listening to what they're saying. Crossing your hands is a sign of defiance. It's a sign of I'm not listening to you. Um, you want to avoid that. Also, uh, nonverbal can be intentional or unintentional. Okay, you may be intentionally projecting a nonverbal communication to somebody, and somebody standing next to them may interpret that differently. Okay, so just be aware of what you're trying to accomplish in transmitting that nonverbal communication. Okay, simply doing this to one of your friends, they may think you're joking around, but somebody standing next to them may think that you're upset with that individual and that you two have a conflict. So just be careful of what you're doing out there. Crossed arms or crossed legs, hunched shoulders, that's a closed body language. That means you don't want to listen to anything else that individual says. Both feet on the floor, both arms down to the side or on your lap. That's telling the individual, hey, I'm willing to listen to you. Go ahead and communicate with me. How do you develop nonverbal communication? Okay, notice how your emotions feel physically. Okay, if you're clenched up and you're mean and you're swelled up and you're trying to communicate non-verbally, it already tells the other individual that you're mad and they're throwing walls up. They don't want to hear what you have to say, okay, because they already know you're pissed off. Okay, so if you're trying to communicate something across to them, make sure that you do it in an open way. Be intentional about your nonverbal communication, okay? And if something worked in the past in nonverbal communication, use it again. Keep it in your chest of tools to use in the future. Written communication is the act of writing, printing, typing, okay? It provides a record of communication, so just be aware of that, okay? Especially on emails. When you're communicating something that is borderline unprofessional, there's a record of it, okay? And I can tell you from speaking from experience, your emails are retrievable even if you trash them, okay? Um, all they need is the hard drive. And it's so if you think you deleted something and you're okay, you're probably not, because there are ways to get that information if it's needed. So just be careful in the first place when you're communicating through email. Also, when you're communicating on paper in a memorandum form, make sure it's professional. You would look awful silly if you wrote a derogatory comment in your memorandum and that thing was read in court, which, believe it or not, anything that you do inside that prison written um, on camera is admissible in court. And believe me, they will use it against you if they get a hold of it and read it and see that it was unprofessional, they're going to use it to make you look unprofessional. The most common form of written communication, like I said, in the prison is emails. So just be very, very careful with your emails. How do you develop written communication? Well, first of all, make it simple. Okay, like I said, don't throw jargon words in there that people don't understand, that only you understand. Make sure it's clear and concise, which means you're including who, what, where, and when, and how in your memorandum. Take time and review your written communication. Just take the couple minutes after you get done writing. Don't rush out the door. Read it. Read it for content. Is it what you wanted to get across in your written communication? If not, you may have to add some more, or you may have to rewrite the whole subject matter. But rushing out the door just to get home quick to avoid all that is not the answer, because that may come back to bite you later on. If you're doing a memorandum, keep a file. Run a copy of it before you send it in to your supervisor. Keep a file on record at your home. Visual communication is the act of using photographs or drawings, slideshows. Again, be aware of your audience. You may slip a slide in there that you want to project some humor into your presentation. May offend somebody else in that room, so just be careful. Rethink, is this actually what I want to do in this training? Most often is aid in communicating. So when I'm giving instruction up in front of the class, I'm going to use a visual aid as part of that instruction. It might be more helpful for some to see that visual aid during your training, which I know a lot of people like to see videos. They like to see photographs in training, and it does aid in that presentation. Ask yourself again, before you include visuals in your presentation, what kind of audience do I have out there? If you offend one person in there, it may come back to bite you later on. When you communicate in a prison, you have to communicate with your supervisors, your colleagues, your superiors, your inmates, okay? And today we're in the digital age, which we all know. We use the phone, we use the email, we use social media. Again, word to the wise, be careful what you put on social media, because I guarantee you that if you work in a prison, your intelligence section is going to have access to your Facebook account or your various accounts. It's very easy to get law enforcement investigative rights to those accounts. And a lot of people say, well, I blocked people so they can't see it. Believe me, they can see it, okay? I have used it in investigations, and it's very easy to get into an locked account. Listening and speaking are two communication skills that are most prevalent in a prison and that you have to be able to do. You have to be able to speak clear, concise, and you have to be able to listen and understand the information that's being relayed to you. Someone once asked me, how do you get up in front of people and speak? Believe it or not, when I was a correctional officer, when I first started out, I hated getting up in front of the classroom and speaking. It just made me nauseous. I didn't like doing it. Now I can get up in front of thousands, and I have in front of tens of thousands of individuals, and speak on corrections. I've done countless thousands of hours of training, and one bit of advice that was given to me at a younger age was it's all about knowing the subject matter. And I thought about that for a while, and I said, you know what? They're right. Think about it. If you're not knowledgeable about the subject matter that you're standing up in front of the room talking about, and you're stumbling and you're reading off of slides and you don't understand the subject matter, how do you come off as a good communicator to that classroom? They're going to sit there and turn you off right away. You have to know the subject matter, and this takes training. It takes learning the subject matter. It may take getting up at home and practicing so that the subject matter comes to you very easily. Okay. The only reason I'm using my other computer right now is because I think communication is most important, one of the most important aspects of being a correctional officer, and I want to make sure I hit all the highlights that I have in my presentation. Other than that, I would stand up here and speak off the hip, but I decided not to do it in this presentation or this episode because there's certain things I want to get across and I don't want to miss. How do you communicate with inmates? Now, when you're communicating with an inmate, I guarantee you, and if you take the approach like I took, when an inmate came to me and asked me a question, I always thought, what does he really want? Okay, and if you use that type of communication style, that'll keep you on your toes um, while you're talking to the inmate. So I'm going to give you some of the do's and don'ts to avoid being compromised by that inmate. So when you talk to an inmate, the process, and I don't want to get into the process of being compromised because that's a whole different episode that I'll be talking about later on. But when you talk to an inmate, you're talking to that inmate and providing information that he's going to share with the other inmates. I guarantee you. And there may be that one lone wolf out there who's working to compromise you, but normally, and I would say at least 90% of the time, when an inmate's trying to compromise you, they're working in a group. Okay, it may be gang members, it may be a specific individual group that's trying to gain something. Maybe it's the group that runs the drugs on the compound and they're trying to get you to bring drugs in. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be gang related. It's just a specific group with some means of you carrying out what they want from you. And there's certain do's and don'ts. Now I'm going to explain to you about being compromised by the inmate through communication. And I'm also going to tell you what I tell all new classes that I've taught. You're at the crossroads right now in your career. And you can choose to go down the left road and be compromised with the inmates. Or you can stay on the straight path and not be compromised. But just realize, for an inmate to escape out of your institution, it takes some planning, it takes some time to initiate that escape and to be successful, as does being compromised. If you become compromised, it was over a period of time that you could have said no at any point, but you decided to keep going with it till you were compromised. So you don't have anybody to blame but yourself. You can't blame the system. You can't blame the warden. You can't blame the institution. You have to sit there and blame yourself because you had every other opportunity, just like anybody else in that prison, not to be compromised, and you chose to be compromised. Always be aware of your surroundings. If you're talking to somebody on the telephone in your office, Be aware of that inmate out there mopping the floor. He's not mopping around your door because it's dirty. He's mopping around that door because he wants to listen to what you're saying on that phone. And if you're talking bad about somebody, especially another staff member, guess where that information's going from that inmate? Right to that staff member. Okay? Because they're going to try to pit you against each other. So be aware of that. Always be aware of what you say. Okay? You don't have to swear when you work in a prison. I know there's a lot of old timers out there that think that that's the way you have to do it in order to get your point across, but I'm telling you, you don't have to swear. Know what your body language says. Okay? If you come in there and you're not dressed appropriately and your hygiene is bad, inmates are going to pick up on that and think that something's going on with you. And there may be something that's going on with you. And they're going to use that to try to hook you. Okay? Know how your actions can be interpreted. For example, when the mortgage crisis in the middle of the 90s happened, and who do you think was there to bail everybody out? It was the inmates. Okay? Hey, if you need it refinanced on your mortgage, here's a good guy to hook you up with. Why would you ever do that? Why would you ever do that? And you may say, I'd never do that. There's people that did it. Okay? Or you may be talking to somebody about wanting a new car, and all of a sudden an inmate out of the blue comes over, hey, if you're looking for a new car, check this guy out. Don't do that. Okay? They're setting you up. Inmates see personal items. Okay? Let me give you an example. If I walk in the room with this coffee cup and it's filled with coffee and you can smell it, this tells you two things about me. One, I like coffee. Two, I like the Patriots. Now that's just enough information for that inmate to take and run with and get into discussion about football. Hey, did you see the Patriots on Sunday? Oh, yeah. Are you from around here? And they'll keep going with it till they're asking you, do you have season tickets? And what they're trying to do is get up as much information from you as possible, and they'll keep going as long as you don't draw a line and tell them, look, I'm not talking about where I live. I don't talk about personal information with inmates. Don't ask me again. Do you understand? Make sure. Do you understand? Okay? Inmates see what you're carrying. Okay? This was probably one of the most number one headache for me as a captain, was our medical trips. Our medical trips were in red folders. And the officers would used to take the red folder in their hand and walk up the compound. Okay, now what are you telling the inmates? You're telling them you're taking a hospital trip. So they follow you to see what inmate you get. And they know inmate Jones is going out on a hospital trip. Why would you do that? 3 things that you keep close to the chest on taking an inmate outside the prison is date, time, and location. You just gave up 2 of those. Okay? So just be aware of that. Grooming, we talked about your hygiene, making sure that your clothes are ironed and everything, and food. They'll see what you're eating because they're going to walk by when you get your lunchbox out and look in, and they're going to try to talk to you about what you like and what you don't like when you're eating. Inmates hear their discussions with coworkers. One of the biggest areas that I got information from was the inmates. They would tell me what staff were talking about, what staff and what information they were utilizing. And they would bring this voluntarily. And I know what they were trying to do. They were trying to get me to investigate these individuals or have some type of conflict with them. And I would just simply go to those individuals and say, look, this is what is happening. This is what's being said. Um, you know, make sure you're aware of what you're saying in the future. They know those individuals who use abusive language. And like I said, you don't have to use abusive language when you're trying to communicate, especially to an inmate. And there should be no such thing as playful behavior. I have seen grab assing with inmates from both male and female staff. Ridiculous. Fist bumping an inmate on the compound. Total disrespect for your institution and your fellow officers. Don't do that stuff. You're not the inmate's friend. When you have contact with an inmate, there's two types of dialogue. Unstructured dialogue, which is unavoidable, and structured dialogue, which is voidable. Unstructured dialogue. Hey, what time is it? Well, you can tell them what time it is. You know, that's unstructured dialogue. That's unavoidable information throughout your daily interactions with the inmate. Then you have structured dialogue. Hey, where do you live? No personal information. When an inmate comes to you for structured dialogue, and the example of the Patriot Cup was structured dialogue. They're trying to get as much information from you as they can so that they can use it to try to compromise you. Okay? So avoid structured dialogue. It is voidable. Okay? Be aware of how you're talking about your fellow staff members, because I guarantee you the inmates are going to take that information back to that individual that you're talking about and tell them specifically what you were saying. Be aware if you're talking about home, especially on the phone. Inmates are listening when you're on the phone, and if you're talking personal business while you're talking to a coworker on the phone, the inmates are recording it and they are passing that information on to the other inmates. Don't talk to an inmate about his life or crime, okay? It's really none of your business. He's been there for, I mean, you can go look at his file and see if he's a violent inmate and what he's in for and that, but don't talk to the inmate about it, because he's going to do nothing but lie to you. Remember, every inmate is innocent in the prison according to them. If you find that you're talking about your personal lives, stop immediately, okay, and end it. Just tell the inmate, I'm not talking about my personal life anymore. Do you understand? How to be not compromised. Know the rules and regulations of your institution, okay? That way, when an inmate comes to you and asks you, remember I talked about knowing information when you're talking to somebody. It's better to know the information. Look it up if you have to, but provide clear and accurate information. Learn to say no. Like I said at the beginning of this video, if you can't say no, this may not be the right job for you. And be aware what your body language projects. Project, I'm a professional. And make sure you document unusual or suspicious behavior. Report it. There should be zero tolerance for any of the information that I talked about being on how an inmate gets you compromised. It's probably in your code of conduct in your institution. it could be disciplinary action if you become compromised, or it could end up being criminal, depending on how far you went and exactly what you did. And believe me, if you think you've gotten away with it for years and you're in the clear, somebody's watching you and they're waiting for that one little bit of information to get to them before they put the trap down on you and pull up charges on you. That inmate is keeping a diary on every interaction with you. 100% of the time, when I investigated a staff member and it came up to criminal charges, the inmate handed me a diary with dates, times, location, exactly what was said with that individual. So just be aware of that. As a supervisor, you want to build relationships with your officers, share ideas, let them be part of the idea sharing, and delegate responsibilities. This is managing a team. This is what a supervisor needs to do. Okay, I hope this instruction gave you some ideas on how to improve your communications as a correctional officer inside the institution. Don't forget to stop by www.correctionalpersonneltraining.com. Join. Membership is free. Also have instructions and training on that website on the members page. The tests are on there. The tests simply ask you for your email address, only so if you stop taking the test, you can go back in and take the test again. I don't do anything with your email addresses except send out updates on the website. So one thing I want to talk about is cuffs. Corrections United Facing and Fighting Suicide. That's coming in January 2021. It's going to be also on the website. So please, if you like this video, hit the subscribe button. I look forward to doing many of these videos, and the next episode will be on emergency preparedness. So until next time, stay safe.